By the time you hear your own child laughing while your husband lies in the next room burning with fever, something inside you has already started to break. You might not feel it right away, not over the sound of ice clinking in glasses and a joke told too loudly, but later, when the house is quiet and you are watching the rise and fall of a sick man's chest, you realize that moment was the fault line. That was when the family you thought you had quietly split in two. My name is Evelyn Harper, and this is the night I stopped seeing my daughter as my little girl and started seeing her as the woman she had chosen to become. The key felt wrong in my hand before I even turned it. It scraped inside the lock like the house was protesting, like it knew I wasn't supposed to be home yet. I'd cut my business trip to Portland short by 3 days because Rowan had called that morning, his voice thin and frayed at the edges, telling me he had a fever and couldn't keep anything down. 66 years old, and I still felt that instinctive rush of purpose whenever someone I loved was sick. "I'll be home by tonight," I'd promised him over the grainy hotel phone, pressing my hand into the cheap bedspread as if I could steady both of us. "Just rest. Take your medicine. I'll handle everything when I get back." The airport had other plans, of course. Delays for weather, delays for mechanical checks, delays for reasons no one bothered to explain. By the time I finally stepped into our front hallway, it was past 9 p.m., my small suitcase bumping over the hardwood, my shoulders aching from recycled air and tight seats. I was ready for quiet. I was ready for darkness and the soft, steady sound of Rowan sleeping. Instead, I heard laughter. Bright, bubbling laughter spilled down the hallway from the living room, too loud and too light for a house that was supposed to be wrapped in the hush of illness. I froze just inside the door, my fingers still looped through the suitcase handle while a cold, creeping dread began to move through my chest. Something was wrong. Not wrong like a broken pipe or a burnt roast. Wrong in a way that made old memories stir old excuses, unclench and fall apart. I followed the sound my steps, soft but not silent, the floorboard I knew by heart, complaining under my heel. They didn't hear me. Why would they? Their world for the moment was perfect. When I reached the doorway to the living room, I stopped. Dana was curled cross-legged on our cream sofa, one of my favorite throw blankets tucked under her knees, like she owned the place, a crystal wine glass in her hand. Her cheeks were flushed with delight, her head tipped back in laughter as Miles, sitting beside her, gestured animatedly in the middle of some story. Empty takeout containers were spread across the coffee table like they'd set up a buffet, and next to them sat a half-empty bottle of the good Chardonnay Rowan, and I had been saving for our anniversary next month. Their faces were open, carefree, like a couple on vacation, not two people supposedly staying with a sick man. As Miles smirked and said between chuckles, "The guy actually tried to argue with me about the parking ticket, like I'm supposed to care that his wife was in labor," Dana slapped his arm lightly and laughed harder. "Oh my God, Miles, you're terrible," she said, eyes sparkling. "That's exactly why I married you." I stood there in the doorway like a ghost, my heart pounding in my throat. Where was Rowan? Where was my husband who had been too weak to keep food down 12 hours earlier? "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their little celebration like a knife through glass. Both of them jerked around, shock rippling over their faces before it rearranged into something like guilt, though not nearly enough of it. Mom, Dana blurted, setting her glass down so fast it clinked against the table. "You're back early. I thought you weren't coming home until Friday." I let my eyes travel over the mess, the food, the wine. "Rowan is sick," I said slowly, each word chosen like I was walking across ice. "That's why I came home." Miles cleared his throat and got up, smoothing the front of his shirt as if he were hosting a polite dinner party. "Hey there, Evelyn." "How was Portland?" he asked, as though the answer mattered more than where my husband was. I didn't bother to respond. "Where is your father, Dana?" Something flickered in her eyes, annoyance maybe, or inconvenience dressed up as concern. "He's sleeping?" she said, waving a hand as if that settled everything. "Has been for hours." The fever broke around dinner time, so we figured we'd grab some food and relax a bit. You know how exhausting it is taking care of sick people. The phrase hit me like a physical shove. I looked at the takeout containers again. 2 sets of chopsticks, 2 used napkins, 2 people eating. My throat tightened. "Did you get him anything to eat?" I asked quietly. "Any medicine?" Dana rolled her eyes just enough for me to notice. "Mom, he said he wasn't hungry. You can't force someone to eat when they're nauseous." But the look in her eyes took me back to childhood, those stubborn moments when she'd already decided the truth was whatever made her life easiest. "I should check on him," I said, turning away. "Mom, really, he's fine. She called after me. Don't wake him up. He needs his rest." I didn't answer. I walked down the hallway past the framed photos of birthdays and graduations that suddenly felt like artifacts from a life I wasn't sure belonged to us anymore. Our bedroom door was slightly open. I pushed it wider and the smell hit me. First fever sweat and stale air. Rowan lay twisted in the sheets, still wearing the same soft blue pajamas he'd had on when I left 3 days earlier. His hair was damp, his skin too flushed and too pale all at once, the way people look when their bodies are losing the fight. The glass of water on the nightstand was full, untouched. The pill organizer I had laid out before I left sat exactly as I'd left it. Tuesday's little square still loaded with his blood pressure medication and vitamins. "Rowan," I whispered, moving to his side. His eyelids fluttered and he blinked slowly up at me, dazed. "Evelyn, you're home," he murmured, his voice cracked and small. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here," I said, pressing my hand to his forehead. The heat that met my palm made me gasp. "When did you last take your temperature?" I asked softly. He tried to shift, failed, and sank back against the pillows. "Tuesday, maybe Wednesday morning," he breathed. "Dana said not to worry about it." "Tuesday." It was Thursday night. My jaw tightened. "Have you eaten anything today?" His laugh was bitter and faint. "She brought me some crackers this morning," he said. "Said that was enough for a bad stomach." Crackers. While my daughter sat 20 feet away eating takeout and drinking my anniversary wine. My husband had been lying here with a fever that had probably been rising for days. I helped him sit up, cradling his back with pillows, and brought the thermometer from the drawer. When the digital beep sounded, the number made my stomach drop 103.2 degrees. He had been left alone like this, abandoned in our bed, while the sound of Dana's laughter floated down the hallway. As I coaxed him to sip water and began the slow, careful ritual of cooling his skin and getting medicine into his body, I could still hear them in the living room. Their voices were a little lower now, but still light, still unconcerned. That sound I knew even then would haunt me long after the fever broke. I spent the night in the chair beside Rowan's bed, waking every hour to check his temperature, guide him to the bathroom, or hold a glass to his lips. By sunrise, his fever had dropped to 99.1, and his breathing had eased. Dana did not appear once. Around 7 a.m., I heard the familiar gurgle of the coffee maker and the clink of dishes. When I was sure Rowan was resting, I stepped into the hallway and walked toward the kitchen, feeling something hard and cold settling inside my chest with every step. Dana was sitting at the kitchen table wearing one of my robes, my favorite one, the soft cream-colored fleece Rowan bought me for Christmas 2 years ago. She looked as though she'd woken from the most peaceful sleep of her life, her hair twisted up casually, her legs tucked under her like she owned every inch of the room. She was scrolling through her phone with one hand and eating toast with jam with the other, the picture of a woman who had not worried about a thing in days. She looked up when I walked in and said with the same bland cheer someone might use to ask about the weather morning mom, "How's Dad doing?" Her tone was so light it almost felt insulting. "His fever broke a few hours ago," I said, keeping my voice steady. "No thanks to anyone else." Dana's eyebrows rose, confusion morphing into annoyance. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, setting her toast down with a sigh that suggested I was making her morning inconvenient. I walked to the sink partly because the dried sauce on the plates and the wine stains on the glasses made my skin crawl, and partly because I needed something to do with my hands before I said something I couldn't smooth over. The counter was cluttered with last night's dinner remains, containers, utensils, glasses they hadn't bothered to rinse. It means I began, as I turned back toward her, that I came home to find dirty dishes, empty wine bottles, and a husband who hadn't had his medication in 3 days. Dana rolled her eyes, leaning back in the chair with that performative exasperation she'd perfected over the years. "Mom, I told you he said he wasn't hungry, and he's perfectly capable of taking his own pills." I stared at her, really stared, trying to find the daughter I remembered beneath the woman sitting in front of me. "Is he?" I asked, because when I checked last night, every single pill from Tuesday and Wednesday was still in his organizer. Dana shifted in her chair, just a small movement, but enough to betray discomfort. Well, maybe he forgot. Old people forget things sometimes. The casual cruelty of it hit me square in the chest. Old people. As though Rowan were some stranger she'd been assigned to check on, not the man who had worked extra shifts to pay for her music lessons, not the father who had driven hours to attend her college performances, not the parent who had co-signed her first apartment because her credit wasn't strong enough. "He's 66, I said, evenly, not 90, and he's been sick. Sick people forget things when they're running a high fever. Dana blew out a breath and looked everywhere but at me. "Look, Mom," she said finally, "I did my best, okay? I'm not a nurse. I don't know everything about taking care of sick people." Her voice sharpened. "But you know how to take care of yourself. You knew how to order dinner for you and Miles. You knew how to open our good wine. The situation has been exhausting," she added a moment later, her voice rising defensively. "Do you have any idea how stressful it is being responsible for someone else?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the words coming out of her mouth while she sat in my robe looking like she'd slept 10 uninterrupted hours. "You barely got any sleep?" I asked, my voice soft but laced with disbelief. Dana's face tightened. "Dad was restless," she said. "He kept making noise. Miles and I could hear him from the guest room. So you heard him," I said slowly, "but you didn't check on him." Dana's expression hardened into something cold and unmovable. What was I supposed to do? He's an adult, Mom. If he needed something, he could have asked. My stomach dropped. "He had a fever over 103 degrees, I said. "People that sick don't always think clearly enough to ask for help." But Dana waved a hand, that practiced gesture of dismissal that had grated on me since her teenage years. "You're being dramatic," she muttered. "It was just the flu or something. People get sick all the time." "Just the flu," I repeated, my voice so low it barely felt like mine. In that moment, I saw the truth, not the one I'd been clinging to for years, but the one that had been staring me in the face all along. My daughter wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't inexperienced. She wasn't struggling. She simply didn't care enough. I drew a slow breath. "Did you even take his temperature?" once I asked. There was a pause too long, too telling. "I touched his forehead a couple of times," she said finally. When another shrug, another dodge. "I don't know, Mom." I wasn't keeping a chart. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else when I said, "Because if you had been keeping track, you would have known his fever was dangerous, that he was dehydrated, that he needed medical attention." Dana's phone buzzed. She glanced at it completely unfazed, then said, "Miles is wondering if we should head home today or tomorrow." The whiplash of that casual question after everything she had done and failed to do made my breath hitch. "You're leaving?" I asked. "Well, yeah," Dana said. "Dad's better now, right? And you're home. There's no reason for us to stay." No reason to stay. The words cracked something open in me. I felt those words, "no reason to stay," settle deep inside me, like sediment in water, heavy and impossible to ignore. Dana gathered her phone and stood brushing crumbs from the robe she hadn't even asked to borrow, as though she had completed some noble task and was ready to return to her real life. She moved toward the hallway, but I stepped into her path before I even realized what I was doing. "Dana," I said quietly when I walked in, "last night you were drinking wine and laughing while your father lay upstairs with a fever that could have put him in the hospital. You didn't give him his medication. You didn't check his temperature. You didn't make sure he drank water. You left him alone with an illness that could have killed him." Her cheeks flushed, but she crossed her arms and lifted her chin in defiance. "I was taking a break," she snapped. "Even caregivers need breaks, Mom." I stared at her, at the woman my daughter had become, someone who had learned how to excuse herself from every responsibility while taking credit for all the effort she never put in. "A break?" I asked. "You mean the 3 days you spent eating takeout, drinking wine, and laughing with Miles while your father's temperature climbed high enough to cause delirium?" Dana's jaw tightened. "You're blowing this out of proportion. What exactly did you help with?" I asked, my voice steady and eerily calm. "Tell me one thing you did that made his illness even slightly easier." She stepped back, her expression twisting into something sharp and accusing. "I stayed here," she said. "That counts. I made sure he didn't, I don't know, fall down the stairs or something." The absurdity of her answer made my stomach turn. "You stayed here," I repeated. "In the same house? Yes. But you didn't care for him. You existed under the same roof while ignoring him." Dana's voice cracked with anger. "I don't have to listen to this." "I tried, Mom. I did my best. If my best isn't good enough for you, that's your problem." She grabbed her purse and stormed off, and Miles followed her, shooting me an apologetic glance over his shoulder, though not apologetic enough to stay or say a word in Rowan's defense. Within minutes they were gone, leaving silence in their wake, along with the bitter smell of cold coffee and last night's takeout. Later that afternoon, once Rowan was stable and resting, he told me the truth I hadn't known I was bracing for. He sat up slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for mine. "Evelyn," he murmured, "there's something I should have told you earlier, something about why Dana came in the first place." I knew before he said it. I felt it in the stillness of the room. "She asked for money, didn't she?" His eyes dropped to the blanket. $8,000, he whispered. The number hit me so hard I had to sit down. 8,000, I repeated. "For what?" Rowan swallowed. "She said Miles lost his job last month, that they were behind on the mortgage, that they were at risk of losing the house." I felt my breath stutter as the pieces clicked together with a sickening clarity. "When did she ask?" I whispered. "Monday morning," Rowan said. "Before you left for the airport." Of course. Of course she had. She had come not to help, but to collect. She had taken our money under the guise of compassion, then abandoned the man whose illness she had leveraged as her bargaining chip. Rowan's voice trembled. "She promised she'd stay by my side. She said she'd make sure I had everything I needed." He looked away, then ashamed of having believed her. Hours later, when Rowan finally drifted to sleep, I sat at the edge of the bed and let the reality settle like a cold fog. $8,000, 3 days of neglect. And now, as if pulled by some invisible string of entitlement, my phone rang. Dana. I answered it with a tension already coiled in my spine. She launched straight into it, her voice sweet and trembling, claiming she was worried about Dad and wanted to check in. I waited. The truth came 30 seconds later. Mom. "We were wondering if you could help with one tiny thing," she said. "We just need help with the mortgage this month. $3,200. That's it." That was it, the moment I realized my daughter didn't see us as family at all. We were an income stream, a source, a solution. Those words, $3,200, landed with the weight of a lifetime of excuses, collapsing. I felt something inside me shift, settle, and harden, and I said no. The silence that followed my refusal wasn't really silence at all. I could hear Dana breathing through the phone, a quick, uneven rhythm that told me she hadn't expected this answer, not now, not after a lifetime of getting exactly what she wanted. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with outrage and disbelief. "You're refusing to help us, Mom. Do you understand what this means? We could lose the house." I closed my eyes suddenly, so tired. "Dana," I said softly, "you already had $8,000 from us 5 days ago. What did you do with it?" There was a beat, then a practiced sigh. "I told you, car payments, credit cards, groceries. Marcus needed clothes for job interviews. Clothes for job interviews," I repeated carefully, choosing each word like it had teeth. Dana the man was wearing a watch that cost more than our monthly utilities. Her breath caught. "You're judging us." "We're trying our best," she snapped. "You and Dad have money. $3,200 is nothing to you." That line, "nothing to you," was the thread that finally pulled the whole tapestry apart. My voice was steady when I said, "Dana, we are 64 and 66. We're supposed to be thinking about retirement, not funding your lifestyle." The shift in her tone was immediate. The softness snapped into something sharp, brittle. "Lifestyle. We're struggling." "You are struggling," I corrected, "because you make reckless choices and expect us to cushion every consequence." She inhaled hard, preparing another justification, but I didn't let her speak. "Dana, what exactly is your plan to get back on your feet?" Silence. I could almost hear her floundering, scrambling for words that weren't coming. When she finally spoke again, her voice was thin. "Marcus has interviews lined up. I'm looking at some opportunities, too." "What opportunities?" I pressed. Another stretch of quiet. Just things. Things. It was incredible, really, how at 32 years old, my daughter still spoke about her life, as if it were a temporary inconvenience she was waiting for someone else to fix. "Dana," I said gently, "you have asked us for more than $14,000 in the past 8 months, and every time you promised it was the last, and every time you came back again." She exhaled shakily, the first crack of emotion breaking through. "I'm begging you, Mom. We can't lose the house, please." "You should consider downsizing," I said softly. "What? No. We shouldn't have to downsize. We worked hard for that house. We deserve to live comfortably." Her entitlement radiated through every syllable, a heat I'd ignored for years, until it began to burn. "You deserve to live comfortably?" I asked. "Dana, you don't work. Marcus has been employed for months, and you two still chose not to get health insurance. You're not living responsibly, you're living in denial." Her voice rose shrill and furious. "I can't believe you're doing this. I'm your daughter." I know I whispered, but love isn't a bank account. And with that, I ended the call. The hours after that moment moved strangely quiet, suspended, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Rowan looked up from his newspaper when he saw my face. "That was Dana," he asked. I nodded. "She wanted $3,200, I said, and I told her no." Rowan set the paper aside, studying me the way a man studies the horizon before a storm. "She's going to be angry. She already is." He hesitated, then asked in a small voice, "Did we lose her?" I met his gaze. "Rowan, we never had the version of her we thought we did. We had the version she let us see." The calls started the next day. First, my sister Janet, always eager to jump into the middle of any family drama, even when she had only half the facts. "Evelyn, I just spoke to Dana," she said breathlessly. "She's devastated. She said you're refusing to help her keep her home." I took a long sip of my tea. "Janet, we've given her more than $14,000 this year." Silence. "14,000, she repeated weakly. She didn't mention that. Of course she hadn't. Dana had a talent for trimming the truth until it fit the shape of her narrative. Soon calls poured in from Michelle, from Robert, even from Mrs. Patterson down the street, each of them repeating the same story Dana had spun to them, each of them asking how we could let our own daughters suffer. By the third day, my patience was worn thin. Rowan and I sat down that evening, the house peaceful except for the soft hum of the kettle. "Rowan," I said, "we need to make some changes." He looked up. "What kind of changes?" "The kind that prevent this from ever happening again." I took a deep breath. "I want to change the locks." Rowan blinked, surprised but not shocked. "The locks?" "She has a key," I said. "She comes and goes whenever she wants. I want that to stop." Rowan nodded slowly. "What else?" "I want her removed from our emergency contacts. Everywhere, our doctor, the bank, anyone with sensitive information." I looked him in the eyes, and "I want to change our will." That quiet shock in his expression was almost painful. "Change it how?" "I want to establish a trust for our medical care, and when we're gone, the rest goes to charity. Dana inherits nothing." The words were heavy, but they did not tremble. Rowan was silent a long time until he finally reached for my hand. "You're right," he whispered. "It's time." The locks were changed. The will was rewritten. The boundaries were drawn. And for the first time in decades, our home felt like ours again, quiet, steady, and safe. Until Dana came pounding on the door. She arrived on a Tuesday morning long before most people in the neighborhood were awake. I was in the kitchen pouring my first cup of coffee when I heard a car door slam hard enough to shake the quiet of the cul-de-sac. Through the blinds, I saw Dana's red sedan parked crookedly behind Rowan's truck. She stepped out wearing a wrinkled coat and jeans that didn't fit quite right, her hair scraped into a careless bun. She looked thin or worn, but her posture stayed the same. Chin, lifted shoulders squared that familiar air of entitlement wrapped around her like armor. She marched straight to the front door and began pressing the doorbell repeatedly, then pounding with both fists when we didn't answer. "Mom, Dad, I know you're home," she shouted. "I saw Dad's truck. Open the door." Rowan appeared beside me in the hallway, his face pale with a mixture of dread and resignation. "Do we answer?" he whispered. I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "Not this time." The pounding grew more frantic, her voice cracking with irritation. "Are you seriously ignoring me, Mom? Open this door." When we still didn't respond, she moved around the house, trying every window and side door she could reach. We watched her from the kitchen, both of us silent like two people who had finally realized the storm outside was no longer their responsibility to weather. Eventually, she returned to the front door, now pounding harder than before. "Mom," she yelled, "please, I need to talk to you." There was something different in her voice this time. Not anger, but panic. "Mom." Something terrible happened. We stayed still. We knew her patterns. Tragedy was her currency, her tool, her key to every door that had ever been closed to her. But I also heard something else underneath fear she didn't quite know how to control. I walked to the door and spoke through it, calm and steady. "Dana, you need to leave." There was a sharp intake of breath. "What, Mom? No, please, just let me explain." "Something happened to Miles. He's in the hospital. I can't handle this alone." Her voice trembled, and for a moment I felt the pull, the old instinct to rush toward her pain, to take it from her shoulders and stack it onto my own. But then I remembered Rowan lying alone in bed with a fever of 103 degrees, while she drank wine and laughed in the living room. I remembered the $8,000 she took to promise care she never provided. I remembered every call, every lie, every crisis that had only ever meant one thing: she wanted more. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dana," I said through the door, "but you still need to leave." "You don't understand," she cried. "He had an accident at work. We don't have insurance. The bills are going to be huge. I don't know what to do. Please, Mom, please, I need you." "No," I said softly. You need to handle your life without expecting us to save you every time it gets hard." There was silence then. Her voice dropped into something small and wounded. "Are you really saying you won't help your own daughter?" "I'm saying," I replied, "that I will not let you misuse us anymore." She let out a sound halfway between a sob and a scoff. "Fine," she said bitterly, "but don't expect me to come crawling back when you need help someday." The threat landed with all the weight of a feather. Rowan and I had already lived the truth of what her help looked like. Depending on Dana in a real emergency would be like asking the ocean to stay still. You'd drown long before the tide changed. "Goodbye, Dana," I said. She stood there a moment longer. I could sense her waiting for the door to open anyway, waiting for us to break, waiting for the familiar pattern to pull tight around us again. When it didn't, she finally turned and walked away. The car door slammed, and then she was gone. Later that day, we learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Miles's terrible accident was a twisted ankle he'd gotten from stepping into a shallow hole on a construction site. He'd been treated and discharged the same afternoon. It wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't even a crisis. But Dana had tried to wield it like a weapon anyway, hoping panic might pry open the door that reason could not. Months passed without a word. Then one morning, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail, addressed with looping handwriting I recognized instantly. It was an invitation Dana's birthday dinner at a restaurant downtown. Below the date and time, she'd included a gift registry. A gift registry for a 32-year-old's birthday. Rowan and I stared at it in disbelief before I dropped it into the recycling bin. "Are you going?" I asked him gently. He shook his head. No. That was it. No guilt, no fear, no second-guessing. We heard later that the party was nearly empty. Apparently, we weren't the only ones she'd been using. Now 2 years have passed since the night I came home early and found my husband alone and suffering. 2 years since the illusion of who I believed my daughter to be fell away. In that time, Rowan and I have found something we didn't realize we'd been missing: peace. Real peace. We've traveled, taken walks without our phones buzzing every few minutes, shared meals, without budgeting for someone else's emergencies. We've remembered what it feels like to laugh without tension, sitting in the room like a third person. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting Dana out of our lives. The answer is complicated. I mourn the daughter I thought I had, but I do not mourn the woman she chose to become. I mourn the years we spent patching holes in her life while she poked new ones in ours. But I do not mourn the boundaries that finally allowed us to breathe. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: love is not blind loyalty. Love is not sacrifice without limit. Love is not rescuing someone from consequences they continue to create. Love, if it is real and steady and proud of itself, has boundaries. And leaving someone to face the results of their own choices is not cruelty. Sometimes it is the deepest, hardest form of love there is, because it means you finally chose to protect yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you or reminded you of something in your own life, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more true life stories and comment below to tell me where you're watching from. Your support means more than you know.